Ross Madden here, and today I'm talking about election fraud. Election fraud is a critical subject we all have to know about, we all have to talk about it, and we all have to stop it, because if you don't have election transparency, you have no semblance of a democracy or republic. We, as Americans, our media at least, claims that nations all over the world, Russia comes to mind, have fake elections. And like Vladimir Putin supposedly had this massive election fraud, but he won his election by 50 million votes almost. He won 6.5 times more than the next person. Meanwhile, in America, we have elections won and lost by a couple hundred, tenths of a percent. Excuse me. And that can be swayed by a baby's breath. But we want to say that Vladimir Putin swayed 50 million votes right under the noses of the entire Russian population. Oh, and he swayed our election, and he killed that Skripal guy in the UK. The Russians are just absolutely off the handlebars, aren't they? In America, we like to pretend like we have the utmost integrity when it comes to our elections, but in California and Michigan, they hand out voter IDs to anybody who says, "A mí también," and can fill out a form.
Say what?
They can't ask for a voter ID.
Why is that? They can't.
The law. The law says you can't ask somebody, which they really should be able to do. You know, I don't think it's too much to ask somebody to show some kind of an ID.
Yeah. I mean, why not? I mean, you have to show an ID for everything else.
Right, to go into a building, you got to show them your ID.
And we say Venezuela is this third world nation that has fake elections. They actually make you use your biometric thumbprint in order to vote. So they've got more election security than we do in America by a long shot. I want to get serious on this for a second because I just pulled up the election results for the Pennsylvania race. It was just won by a couple hundred votes. Connor Lamb unseated the incumbent Rick Saccone. Rick Saccone is taking it very seriously. Last I heard, he was suing to impound all of the voting machines at every single precinct of the 4 counties that voted. So that would cost him about $30,000 or $50 per precinct. There are articles coming out saying that this would be a completely useless process because Pennsylvania uses electronic voting machines that don't produce a paper trail. They're called direct recording electronic voting machines, and they're just touchscreen. So whenever you do an audit, it's just going to repeat the tally rather than reproducing an image of each vote, which is what we have in Virginia, what they have in Texas. In Texas, there's actually a lawsuit being brought before the Texas Supreme Court to produce those images, which they have not been able to do. They were able to produce a memory card, but the memory card was actually blank. So I think Rick Saccone will only be able to catch the election fraud if it was done on one central location. If the data is actually being adjusted on each individual voting machine, then it's just going to repeat a faulty tally again. But if the data is being adjusted at a central location, and there's not that many people looking at that central location, and that seems to be the way they're doing it around the country, I think that would be worth, investigating, spending the $30,000 to make sure that they're not centrally jigging the elections. That's how they seem to be doing it down in Texas. Laura Presley is the one who was suing for that memory card, and they basically just messed with the wrong lady's election. This is a tech executive who was able to dive into the data and figure out exactly the method and the algorithm that was being used to adjust her election data. So I'm just going to leave in a couple clips because this is a groundbreaking case, and it should be an example for how we treat election fraud situations around the country.
I ran for the council. We had a completely, incredibly professional campaign. We had block walkers, phone bankers, we had wonderful donors, and we had polls that showed I was winning this election. When election night came around and the electronic voting results were reported, my opponent somehow had beat me 2-1, and there was absolutely no way. We knew that. There was only 18 precincts in my race, which is a small race, city council race. And almost every single precinct had more ballots cast than the voters who had voted. And then I did a more sophisticated analysis and found a really interesting repetitive mathematical pattern, because in a situation where an election's corrupted, there's going to be a pattern, because the programmer or whoever's hacking the election, they've got a model that they're shooting for. And so we think we found that model. It was a 2-to-1 ratio program targeted by precinct, and that's why the precinct values were off. Here in Texas, we have some of the best election laws on the books, and we said, let's just do a manual recount of what's called ballot images, and you can do that in Texas. And when we showed up at the recount, they could not produce the legal ballots for the recount. And so, oh my gosh, so now we've got statistical patterns. We have a county who can't produce the original ballots that are supposed to be used for the recount. And we said, this is illegal. We're going to file a lawsuit. So we did. We filed an election contest here in Texas. And actually, it's the first of its kind in the state that's challenging these electronic voting machines that are not retaining these backup records required by law in our state constitution. So all your votes go onto a memory card that's about this big. It's about the size of a credit card. And those memory cards from all the precincts around your county merge to one computer. So if you want to hack an election or you want to corrupt an election, you don't have to be at the precincts. All you need to do is be at the main computer where almost nobody's watching. You don't need the Russians. You don't need an internet connection. You don't need a modem connection. All you need is a memory card that can have a program written on it. It gets put into the main computer, downloads a program, and backwrites the results. And there you go. It's not actually that hard. I've had engineers work for me who could do this with their hands tied behind their back.
That is an absolutely shocking case. So we've got a couple different Republicans around the country claiming that their elections have been rigged. And you know what Mike Cernovich says about this? Boo-hoo, my election's rigged. And you know what? He's actually making an insightful point, because all of these people are coming at their election fraud cases after the fact. Even if this lady from Texas wins her case, it's 2018. That was a 2014 election. Her whole term is over now. So she's proving a point, but that's it. She's not actually changing anything. If you want to change something, you actually have to stop the election before you give your concession speech. You have to be able to say, I have hard evidence of election rigging, and I'm about to explain how two people can do that, can prove that there was election at an individual precinct right here on this video. To do an independent election check on any individual precinct, all you would need is two pieces of data. You need one, how many people voted that day at that precinct, which you heard the lady from Texas say there were way more votes cast than voters. So any baboon with a counter sitting outside an election precinct is going to be able to catch, it's called ballot box stuffing, when you add extra votes into one candidate's side. The other piece of data, number 2, is the approximation of, not the number of votes, but the percentage of votes that went to each candidate, which can be approximated by an exit poll. And there's actually really good political science behind exit polling and how they verify an election. It turns out you need about 300 exit polling ballots in order to verify a precinct. And that depends slightly on the number of people that actually vote. And that is also only within 4 or 5 percentage points of accuracy, which if these elections are really close, it's not going to be able to tell. But if if you're winning solidly, you're going to be able to tell if this election was then made to seem really close when it's not. So I went to surveysystem.com, and with a confidence level of 95%, which is scientific confidence, and a confidence interval, which is the amount of error, and 3,000 voters, population of 3,000 voters, you need a sample size of 341. If you want a confidence interval of 4%, you're going to need more voters. It's 500 exit ballots. And let's say we want a really accurate survey, you're going to need a whole lot more voters, over 2,000 voters. Well, let's say you won in a landslide by more than 10%. You only need 93 people to take your exit poll. This is very plausible. In fact, it's basically lazy if it's not happening. So let's just go back to 5% and change the population. If you have a greater population, let's say 5,000, you need a larger sample, but not that much larger. And if you go smaller, 2,000, it's smaller, but not that much smaller. Even 1,000 is just barely less than 300 for a 5% error. So you need about 300 voters to take your exit poll in order to get an accurate exit sample. So that's it. That's all you need. You need 2 pieces of data that 2 people could gather at any one precinct. And with that, you could say, I'm not conceding this election because at this precinct we proved fraud. End of discussion. We need a recount. That's how you do it. You have to be proactive. Coming at it after the fact, you will always fail. They will just roll the narrative, they will just roll the news feed, and you will be brushed underneath the rug like all these other Republicans who may or may not have won their election fair and square. We'll have to see whether she won or lost her election, but it's not going to change anything. If you want to change something, you have to be proactive. You got to do this. You have to stop it before you concede. And the only way to do that is to get the live data at each individual precinct. So, if Republicans want to win elections again, you got to stop being lazy. You got to get off your butt on election day and not just vote, but stand outside and make sure that these elections are being tabulated properly. Thank you so much for watching. This is Ross Madden. Have a great day.